Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if your mental health struggles growing up might actually shape how you lean politically as an adult? It is a big question, and this new study dives deep to find some surprising connections. So imagine this, we're living in a world where politics feels more divided than ever. People are arguing about pretty much everything. Scientists and researchers are trying to figure out why, and they know that our childhood and teenage years are super important for shaping who we become, including our views on the world and how we think about politics. Now, we know that sometimes people who had a tough time with their mental health as kids are less likely to vote when they grow up. But what about the bigger picture? What about how they feel about things like trust in society, or which political parties they might support? That is what this study wanted to explore. They looked at a really long study, tracking over 2,000 people in Norway for almost 30 years, from when they were teenagers right up until their 40s. This is a huge amount of time, and it allowed them to see how mental health issues that stick around or change over time can be linked to political stuff later in life. The researchers basically looked at two main types of mental health problems. First, internalizing problems, which are like feelings you keep inside, such as depression and anxiety. Second, externalizing problems, which are more about outward actions, like being impulsive or aggressive. They use this awesome dataset called the Young in Norway Study. It has been collecting information from the same people over many years, starting way back in 1992 when they were just teenagers. This means they have a really good picture of how these individuals developed over time. So, how did they figure out the different paths people's mental health took? They use a cool statistical tool called Latent class growth analysis. Think of it like sorting people into different groups based on how their mental health symptoms changed or stayed the same over those 28 years. They found three main patterns for internalizing problems. There were people who generally had low levels of these internal feelings and stayed that way, the low stable group. Then there were people who started with higher levels but saw them decrease over time, the elevated decreasing group. And finally, a smaller group who started with higher levels and saw them actually increase, the elevated increasing group. This gives us a much more detailed picture than just saying someone had depression. They did a similar thing for externalizing problems, but found two main groups. One group had higher levels of these outward behaviors, and they tended to decrease over time, called elevated decreasing. The other group had high levels that pretty much stayed high, the elevated stable group. Now, for the really interesting part, what does this mean for politics? They found that people in both the elevated decreasing and elevated increasing groups for internalizing problems were more likely to be left-wing political thinkers compared to the low stable group. And more specifically, the elevated decreasing group was actually more likely to vote for far-left parties. On the flip side, those in the elevated increasing group had a harder time and showed higher worries about immigrants. When they looked at externalizing problems, a different pattern emerged. Those in the elevated stable group, the ones whose outward acting out behaviors persisted, were significantly more right-wing. They were more likely to oppose social equality, felt more threatened by immigrants, and supported more conservative policies. And when it came to voting, they were more likely to vote for populists, right parties, and less likely to vote for center-left parties. This study also looked at trust. Across the board, whether it was internalizing or externalizing problems, higher levels of these issues were linked to lower levels of political and social trust in midlife. This is a pretty big deal for how a society functions. And yes, they confirmed what other studies have found: people with mental health problems, both types, were less likely to vote. This is concerning because voting is a key way people can influence their government. So what is the big takeaway here? It is that our mental health journey from adolescence through adulthood really matters for our political views. It is not just about having a bad day or a single difficult period. It is about the patterns that develop over time. The researchers suggest a few ideas why this might be happening. For people with internalizing problems, maybe they're drawn to more egalitarian ideas because they've experienced feeling excluded or disadvantaged. Or perhaps they connect with left-wing ideologies that talk about systemic oppression. For those with externalizing problems, their tendency to oppose others might translate into more right-wing or even populist right views, which often tap into anxieties about outgroups. Now, it is important to remember this is a correlation. The study found links, but it can't definitively say that mental health causes political views. It is possible that political views also influence mental health, or that some other factor influences both. They also couldn't measure mental health at the exact same time as political views, so they had to look at the whole picture over time. and they couldn't perfectly control for all possible influences like gender or upbringing. But even with these limitations, the findings are important. They tell us that if we want to understand political divides and promote a healthier democracy, we need to pay attention to mental health, especially from a young age. Early interventions and support could make a big difference. It suggests that supporting young people's mental well-being isn't just about their personal happiness. It might actually have a ripple effect on the political landscape for decades to come. This has been a fascinating look into how our inner world can shape our outward political beliefs. What do you think about these findings? Does it make sense to you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply. We'll see you in the next one.